Some of the many tools in my educational quiver are things like board games and card games. So that's Skippo, Makakoi, Catan, even Eldorado. A lot of these games can do all different kinds of things for you in the classroom, and they can assist you in multiple different ways. One of them being the fact that you give a little bit of a history lesson, or you could even just have it be more of a casual time, getting to know your kids and everything else. Today, we're going to show you a quick game that you can play multiple times in a row. It always has a bit of a chaotic ending, and it's very, very interesting. Helps to keep students on their toes, and it has a whole bunch of interesting varieties that they make, all right? That is going to be Looney Labs' FLUXX. This is the main game, FLUXX. It comes in a few other different varieties and some very specific characteristics that can be added later on, which we'll talk about. But for the most part, we're going to look at the main game first and then glance at one of the other options. First off, obviously it comes in a very cool looking box, but you're also going to get, obviously, your how to play rules, as well as a series of other main character or main aspect cards. The first thing we end up with is your basic rules card. So everything starts off, all players involved are going to play, they're going to draw one card, and then they play one card from their hand, all right? Their hand traditionally starts off with 5 cards, all right? And so when their turn comes, at the moment, they would draw one and then play one. But that's where things get a little sticky right off the bat, because the first classification of cards is new rules. So new rule cards can come in all different varieties, and they can change just about anything in the system. So just about any possible rule could be adjusted at any given time. And that causes for a good bit of chaos to be added in, because you could change your hand, and in the middle of your hand, you could lose all of your cards, or you could cause everybody else to lose all of their cards, or you could gain other people's cards, all because of changes in rules. So everybody has to pay attention the entire time. So it does a great job of keeping everyone's attention, even if it's not their turn. They can't just check out and wait until it gets back around to them, because they'll have missed a good portion of the game. The next set of cards is action cards. So actions are obviously things that they're going to be able to do in the game, right? Actions that they can perform, right? And they come in all different varieties and flavors as well. This again is going to be obviously different from a new rule, because this is only going to take place at one point, and could drastically change things, because it could have effect on those rules. It could be an individual effect on a single card, or it could be affecting another player. So makes for a lot of variety there too. Next, the real question comes in: how do you win a game of FLUXX? And part of the answer is keepers. There are a whole variety of keepers. Keepers are always colorfully, artistically driven, and they generally have a set of themes to go with them. These themes are then tied together, right, in our last set of cards called the goals. So, at any given time, when it is your turn, you can play any one of these style of cards, whether it be a goal, a new rule, an action, or you can lay down a keeper. Any of these are an option for you when it's your turn. And so that creates a good bit of chaos, all right? You're constantly changing what the goal is, all right? Or you're constantly causing different actions to occur. You might lay down a keeper at one point, and then that keeper is worthless in the next phase. So some people like to hold on to their keepers, other people like to get rid of their keepers right off the bat. And then obviously, again, the new rules are obviously going to change everything on a constant basis as well. So really the major name of the game, just as it says, is constantly in flux. To start off, we're going to show a basic hand. as the rules sit right now, we have draw 4, we have a hand limit of 2, and we have a play of 2. And then the current goal we're sitting at is called chocolate cookies, which means you need a piece of chocolate and you need a cookie in order to win. And if you have both of those keepers, you win. I currently have no keepers, and so that's what we'll progress from. All right, now, as mentioned before, these basic rules are still in session, but if there's a card on the new rule line that supersedes it or is something higher than that, then we go with the new rule instead. Case in point, a draw 1 versus a draw 4. So we always go with the new rules whenever present, but we leave those basic rules out just so we always have something to come back to. So the first aspect is I'm going to draw 4. Now, as noticed before, I currently only have 2 cards in my hand. They're my leftovers. It's my hand limit 2 right there. And I'm going to draw 4 instead of the 1 that I would normally for my basic rules. So there's my 4 cards that I've just drawn. I'm going to add them to my stack and see what I have to play. So at the moment, I can play only 2 cards. So that comes into play very quickly. So I have to be wise about what I choose to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to trash a rule. So this trash rule allows me to take one of these new rules right here, right, and remove it from current play, or put it in the discard pile. All right, now I'm going to choose to go ahead and remove this 2 play because I honestly would like to play more than 2 cards. And so when I reveal it, I actually underneath it had already been played a play all. So in the previous round, someone had already played play all and the person before me had gone and put a play 2 to reduce it. So once you remove a new rule, any pre-existing rules that were there before will then come into play. You don't remove them off of the bottom, you just leave them on the bottom. All right, so that's now been pulled and that's in discard. So now I get to play all of my cards. This action card only comes into play for that one single session, and then it is also put into the discard pile as well. So now I'm free to go ahead about my business. So the first thing I'm gonna do, just so I get them all out there, right, is I'm going to put out my keepers. Oh, look, I've got chocolate. So I'm halfway to the cookies, the chocolate cookies, right? And so that gives me hope that I could possibly win. But my hand's not done. I still have 3 more cards. So without showing my cards distinctly, I've got a card here that says everybody gets one. And what it allows me to do is I basically pull a series of cards, 1 card for every person that is playing with me currently, and then each of us gets 1 of those cards. And I get to delve out those cards. So I'm gonna hand out those cards. I get 1 too, all right? Just so happens the card I got is actually a keeper, all right? It is the milk, all right? So now I have 3 keepers, and by interesting fact, it came out to be relatively fortuitous because another card that I have is a gold card. So this is a gold card right here, and it allows me to actually change the goal of the game itself to what's now is chocolate milk. And I have those 2 keepers, meaning I automatically win the game. For this one, I'm not going to play a full hand, but I did want to show you one of the interesting variations of things that can occur during the middle of the session that can cause you to have to make some adjustments on the fly. Good example of that would be a card like this called inflation. And basically what inflation does is anywhere that there is a 1 or any other digit that you actually see, if it's written out, if the number is written out, it doesn't count. But if it is on the card as an actual number, it now is that number plus 1. So that means that my draw 4 would actually now be a draw 5. And then my play 4 would actually be a play 5. So that can be, again, a nice little bit of adjustment. And one of the things that you have to keep in mind from. So if your student isn't paying attention, or you're not paying attention, and you sit here and you're looking at like, okay, look, I could draw 4, that's great, and don't even notice it, then you're going to be missing out on cards, all right, and causing yourself some problems. But you have to follow all rules, right, and that's the general play of it. As mentioned before, I love to play this game with my students. Generally, I can play with anywhere between 4 to 5 students. The most I've ever played with was 15 students. That was a little much, but it was still pretty interesting to have. The more interesting things that you can do is once you can get students to be paying attention and they're interacting and they're used to all those changes relatively quickly, then you can switch over to some other different varieties. And so one of the really great varieties, the fact that once they've learned the basic game FLUXX, is you have things like FLUXX Chemistry. All right, so they have FLUXX Chemistry, they have FLUXX Math, they have FLUXX Natural Science, they have FLUXX Physics. They've got a few different other varieties too, which can all be found in some cases in your local game store, on Amazon, or just through Looney Labs themselves. Looney Labs is the people who made the FLUXX system. And they're constantly coming out with a couple other different varieties and things like that. But I've played this multiple times with my anatomy class. There's an anatomy FLUXX, with biology classes, again with chemistry classes. I always buy at least a couple decks every year and then donate them to the school just so that we have something to play with. But they make for a really, really nice, not necessarily downtime game, but for that transitional periods that you may have periodically. But they also are a great learning tool. They also give you some nice pictures to go along with it, cards that you can use to represent things. You could show them as almost a flashcard in some cases. So when you're using those extra special decks like the chemistry version and things like that, it can be really, really good. But that being said, I do suggest you play the first FLUXX first, and it provides a good bit of a basis for things. Students get a good chance of staying communicative in that process, and they learn that they need to stay attention, right? And it can create a little bit of fun for you and your class, and a little bit more cordial at times. So that's my suggestion. That's my walkthrough of FLUXX.